Well, this is an episode that I certainly hadn't planned for, and it seems weird to actually even be doing it. But as I'm sure you all know, last week the Beatles released a new single, which they're now calling their last single. It's called Now and Then. And it's been the talk of the internet, and the chatter has been everywhere. And frankly, I didn't really think I'd do an episode on it, but of course, you know I'm a huge Beatles fan. So I thought I'll go ahead and give you my take on it because what's happening in the internet is people are saying, should they have done it? And what about the music video? Is it any good? And so on and so forth. Well, here's what I think about all that. Let's drop the needle on Now and Then. As Frank Zappa used to say, who could imagine that in 2023 we'd be talking about a brand new Beatles song? Well, here we are, Now and Then. Let's take a look at how the song came about. Before Lennon was murdered, back in 1977, in his apartments there at the Dakota in New York, he recorded a bunch of demos, mainly him just playing piano and singing along. And they were really unfinished songs. And he recorded them on a cheap little cassette recorder, so not high quality. But then, after he was killed, and then when he got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, about 1994, I think, Yoko Ono approached Paul McCartney and gave him one of those cassettes. And she said, there are 4 songs on here, John's demos. So Paul thought, well, maybe we'll figure out some way to finish them. So in 1995, he got together with George and Ringo, and then they enlisted Jeff Lynne to help them, and they started working on these unfinished demos of John's. And this was going to become part of what was a project called The Long and Winding Road. But George and Ringo didn't want to bring it out with that title. They said that's too McCartney-centric. So it morphed into a project called Beatles Anthology, which was to be a TV show, a coffee table book, and some records. Well, in typical Beatles fashion, it quickly sprawled into something much bigger. As they were doing it, the 3 surviving Beatles were working on these unfinished demos of John's. And Jeff Lynne helped them finish 2 of them, Free as a Bird and Real Love. And Free as a Bird came out on their Anthology #1 album set, and then Real Love on Anthology #2. And at the time, Real Love, which was the second one, was touted as the last Beatles recording. But now here we are, all these years later, with another last Beatles recording. Anyway, at that time, they tried working on a song called Now and Then, but they couldn't get very far with it because the audio was even worse than Free as a Bird or Real Love. The piano was overtaking Lennon's voice, and there was the sound of the TV in the background that they couldn't isolate. So they shelved the project, and nothing ever happened. The 4th song was a song called Grow Old With Me, but it was already released on a Lennon album after his death, Milk and Honey. So what happens with the 3rd song, Now and Then? It just goes into a vault. But Paul never forgot about it. So now we fast forward many years to 2021. And at this point, Peter Jackson down in New Zealand is working on taking all of this footage that was shot of the Beatles as they were making Let It Be and turning it into a new 8-hour documentary called Get Back, because Jackson wanted to really tell the story of how that album got put together and what was going on with the band at that time. Well, as he's looking at all this footage, he gets really frustrated because there's lots of footage of John and Paul talking together, but you can't make out what they're saying because they're strumming a guitar or there's noise in the background and their dialogue gets muted. So Jackson turns it over to his audio technicians, and they start working on an assisted machine language software program that could learn what a guitar sounded like and what John's voice sounded like and what Paul's voice sounded like. And in doing this, he was able to separate the voices from the instruments. Fun fact, by the way, Peter Jackson names this software that they've created Mal, as a tribute to Mal Evans, the long road manager, roadie of the Beatles. Well, then after that, someone, Peter Jackson or Paul, or maybe the two of them together, I don't know, came up with the idea that they could isolate John's voice on the song I Got a Feeling, which was the last rooftop performance, the last performance they did on the rooftop of Apple Records in London in 1969. So Peter Jackson did that, and then Paul used the footage and the isolated Lennon vocal when he went on tour so that he could actually play the song live and sing with John Lennon all these years later live as well. And that was phenomenal to see. So that got Paul thinking, I wonder if Peter Jackson could perform his magic with the old cassette tape of Now and Then. So he sent it down to New Zealand, and Peter had his guys look at it and work with it, and then they sent the track back to McCartney. And McCartney describes it as hearing John Lennon's voice crystal clear. So he calls up Ringo, and they decide they're going to make a finished song out of Now and Then. So what they did is they went back, they got Giles Martin, who was George Martin's son, their original record producer, who's done a lot of work for the Beatles and their restoration stuff, the Love soundtrack and so forth. He got Giles Martin involved, and they went back and discovered there was some tracks of George playing guitar back in 1995 on that very track Now and Then. So they incorporated that into this master that they were building. Paul did some more piano work and bass work. Ringo recorded new drums. And then they actually went and got a string orchestra in Hollywood to record strings so it could sound more like an old Beatles track. And interestingly, there's a story where the orchestra members never knew they were working on a Beatles song. Now they know. Giles also discovers that if he could take snippets from the harmonies in Here, There, and Everywhere, Eleanor Rigby, and Because, he could get them into the same key as Now and Then and use those vocalizations, the oohs and the ahs, in the new song. As the song is progressing, Paul and Ringo convince Peter Jackson to make a music video for it. Now, Peter Jackson's got two problems right out of the gate. First is, he's never made a music video, and he's not sure that he could even do it. And secondly, how do you make a music video when two of the four members are no longer with us? In trying to find footage, Peter Jackson contacts Apple and says, go through the vaults and see if you can find any footage of the lads recording during that anthology period where they may have been working on this song. So Apple goes and looks, and they find a short little piece, and they send it, it's edited. They send it to Peter, and he looks at it, and he gets very intrigued because he sees that, because it's edited, George actually appears wearing 4 different shirts. So Jackson gets back in touch with London and says, keep looking in the vaults. There's got to be more footage. So they did, and they found 14 hours of footage that they had forgotten that existed. So Peter was able to use some of that footage in this music video that he's creating. So what you will see in there is actually George and Ringo and Paul back in 1995 working on this song with Lennon's voice in the foreground. On YouTube, you can find the song, and then you can also find Peter Jackson's music video. You should check them both out. Okay, so now we come to the hard part. Is Now and Then any good? And should it have even been released as a Beatles song, let alone what Apple is calling the last Beatles song? Well, that's actually a pretty tough question to answer. Now and Then is a good song, but I wouldn't say it's the best Beatles song, even with all the work that they put into it. Like Free as a Bird and Real Love, Now and Then is a rather weak John Lennon piano-driven song. But I have to give credit to John, Paul, George, Ringo, Giles, Jeff Lynne, and everybody for putting it together and sharing it with us. Listening to the song and watching Peter Jackson's music video actually brought tears to my eyes. Yeah, the lads are back for one more go-round. There's a lot of talk on the internet about Peter Jackson's video because in it he incorporates footage of Paul and Ringo as they appear now with images of John and George back in the Sgt. Pepper days, and then even with Paul and Ringo singing with Paul and Ringo now with younger versions of themselves. And people are going, this is just weird, this is technology out of hand. Well, I disagree. I mean, I don't have a problem with technology in Beatles music because the Beatles have always used technology. They were one of the first bands to ever have guitar feedback in the opening of I Feel Fine. They used backward tape on Rain and tape loops on Tomorrow Never Knows. So I'm quite comfortable and rather enjoying that technology is being used by the Beatles yet again. Now back to that comment about this being the last Beatles song. I wonder, as you remember, Real Love was touted as the last Beatles song. Now and Then, the last Beatles song. Well, just a couple of days ago, Peter Jackson said that conceivably there could be more new Beatles songs using the same technology that was used in Now and Then. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. And the boys, they'll just keep crossing that road back and forth to Abbey Road. That's my take on it. Check out the music video, check out the song, and enjoy it. Leave your comments down below. As always, thanks for watching, and keep it rocking.
If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.